Welcome to Reflections on Identity, a podcast series explaining educators' narratives on their professional identity. Today we are talking to Molly Ayre, Qualification Development Lead for a Counselling Qualifications awarding body and a therapist in private practice. Welcome, Molly. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your role?
Yes, of course. And hello, Carol and Neil as well. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. As you said, I am a qualification development lead for an awarding organisation, and we basically focus on counselling qualifications, a little bit of life coaching as well. So my role is to design and develop regulated and unregulated qualifications, which meet sort of professional and regulatory standards. I'm also involved in creating CPD training for professionals, and really excitingly, more recently, I'm going to be involved in developing teacher training for counselling tutors, so specifically for counselling tutors. So I sort of came into this role actually at the beginning of the pandemic, and before that, I've been a lecturer and counselling curriculum manager for counselling training in further education, right through sort of from level 2 to level 5. And I spent a few years as a teacher trainer in further education as well. I've been practicing for coming up to about 30 years in counselling, and I'm still practicing as a therapist in private practice. I suppose overall my roles are about facilitating growth and learning, whether it's for clients, for learners, or for other professionals. So that's basically sort of what I do.
I mean, Molly, obviously, identity is absolutely critical to any kind of therapy and counselling in terms of the practice. What do you see? Do you see identity as important to you, and why do you think it is? Why do you think professional identity is important to you if it is?
Mm. And Neil, it absolutely is, and I suppose I'm lucky in my profession that it's very important within the profession as well. It's sort of it's a central concept in counselling, in personal growth, development, well-being, and so. But it's really particularly important to me, I suppose, because it's in a way it's the reason I came into education. I didn't always know that, but I have learned that over the years, because my identity is sort of bound by my personal history, if you like. So just for a bit of context, got time. My dad grew up in poverty in the East End in London in World War II, and he basically didn't have an education. He then went on in later years, in his 40s, he earned a master's degree, and then in his 80s, he undertook a PhD. So culturally in my family, the values are very inherently based around the importance and value of education for sort of personal growth and development. So I sort of took on board those values, if you like. I sort of internalised them. And so when I came into education, as I said, I didn't realise at the beginning that was what sort of, in effect, it put me in the door. It's no surprise that I ended up where I have. But I suppose over time, I've developed a sort of new layers of self, if you like, of my own identity. And they've come through my own philosophical ideas around education, so more of a sort of humanistic approach to education, which really contrasted with my dad's. So I was able to sort of grow beyond those very early constructs of who I thought I was to a more professional position, which was, in a sense, more grounded in theory and philosophy. So there's a sort of combination, really. And yeah, very, very important for me in who I bring to the work that I do across the board, whether it's, around education, whether it's in practice with clients. So it's really important for me to know who I am.
Mhm. And I mean, you've obviously had multiple roles. I mean, we worked together, a decade or more back in teacher education, teacher training. I mean, you've had this sort of awarding body role. You've trained and worked with counsellors yourself. You are a counsellor, a therapist. Do you have any sense of the either the similarities or differences between role and identity? Are they synonymous? Are they different? Do you feel your identity changes with the changes in role? I mean, have you got any sort of views on that?
Yeah, I was thinking about whether they can be separated, whether my role can be separated from my identity, and that includes my professional identity. And actually, in a way, I sort of don't think they are. And again, like I said at the beginning, because my role is within the counselling profession, and the counselling profession is sort of my professionalism is tied to the philosophical ideas of the approaches that I use, and actually some broader approaches as well. In a way, the two become very complementary. So they're not distinct. They're very much linked. But I do, I suppose, bring different parts of that identity to my different roles. So in therapeutic practice, it's very much a sort of soft approach of creating a safe space, a very non-directive space that clients can grow in. If I'm thinking about teaching, it's more structured, but it's still about facilitating growth and learning. And then in my role in the awarding organisation, I suppose that's more about implementing different standards and ethical practices for the growth of the profession, really, because I'm involved in developing qualifications. They have a direct influence on what's happening in the counselling profession. So I see them as very linked, but I can draw on different aspects of that, and I can do that quite deliberately in a way. And I think it's great in a way, because I was thinking about this in terms of like new neuroscience, neuroplasticity, how we know now that how we think about ourselves can change over time. When I was training, we were sort of taught that our identity, our self-concept is sort of set through these formative years, and that was sort of it. But we now know through neuroscience that our brains are plastic and we can change those identities. And I can really see that in myself, how new experiences, thoughts and ideas are shaping my identity. So I suppose the answer is I don't think that they're separate. I can't see that you can have one without the other in many ways. Yeah.
And I suppose a layperson would think of a therapist or a counsellor as being quite maybe isolated to the wrong word, but you're generally working on your own,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're doing group therapy with an individual client, or I guess client is the right word. I mean, I know you've alluded to your further education work and your awarding body work. Do you get any sense, Molly, that your identity has some kind of collaborative or collective role? I mean, is there a sense of others and working with others to help you sort of get a sense of professional identity in what you do?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even in my therapeutic practice, and it's very apparent, particularly when you are in private practice, that you're working in isolation. You often don't work with a team of counsellors around you and that sort of thing. But actually, when I think about what I bring to those different roles, be it in an awarding organisation, and interestingly, this has come up, through remote working. We became a remote workforce through the lockdown. But any area where I'm working collectively with other people, I do all the time. I mean, I'm working online with groups of tutors and working with other stakeholders. I understand that because identity it's basically inherently relational, because it forms as a sense of ourself in relation to others. So it can't be anything, in my thinking, it can't be anything but collaborative and relational, because I only have a sense of who I am in relation to you or somebody else or something else. So there's very much a sort of sense of that I carry in my work. I feel it in all the different contexts that I work in. But it's interesting what I bring to that as well. So the sort of nature of my collaboration might change depending on who I'm working with. So actually with some external stakeholders, people that I see as quite authoritative, I might bring a sort of younger identity to that. From my formative years, that sort of feeling of being less than in some way, still sort of seeking approval. Or if I'm working with colleagues and learners, more adult self comes into play, and I'm then a more sort of confident and grounded professional, really. So 100% my identity is linked to how I work with others.
And I mean, finally, are there any occasions where your professional identity has encountered challenges? I mean, without necessarily wanting to divulge individuals or name groups or anything, Molly, has there ever, I suppose, this kind of cognitive dissonance might be a phrase used in that sort of field, but has there ever been times when your identity, sort of ethically or otherwise, has sort of encountered challenges or resistances by working with others?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I do think that I mean, in a way, it's natural that different identities will, at some level, struggle to find a place in different contexts. And it's interesting because it happens everywhere, and it happens in the counselling professions as well, be it in awarding organisation activities, teaching and learning, or in practice. There's this sort of ongoing struggle to this sort of idea of holding space for an authentic self. Like I am always attempting to bring my authentic self to my work, but we live in a world where culturally there's a lot of value placed on this idea of positive psychology, positive outcomes, and sometimes that's quite at odds with that sort of dysfunction and discomfort. I have to sort of remind myself really that that part of myself is really valuable in my work, because it helps me connect to people in that place, because we all have some degree of difficulty, or well, I think probably we do, in terms of how we see ourselves. But I suppose because self in itself, identity in itself, so central to counselling, learning and development, I find that grounding as well, because despite the resistance, despite the tensions, I know it's crucial. I can't do my work without a very clear and distinct sense of who I am and who I'm bringing at different times. It's so important in what I do. But yes, I think there is a tension often, even with groups of like-minded counsellors and counselling professionals.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Carol, have you got anything you would like to sort of add to the discussion, or anything that's been brought up or not been brought up you want to add to at all?
No, I think you have been very thorough, Neil, with your questions.
I mean, thank you so much, Molly, for taking the time and giving us a very, very enlightening view from a kind of an educational, but also a therapeutic angle as well, which I'm sure the listeners will really appreciate. So thank you so much again for coming on for us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed thinking about it and chatting to you today. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly, for sharing your thoughts. You have been listening to Reflections on Identity. We hope you can join us for the next episode in our series. We'd love to hear from you, so please put your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to be notified of the next episode, click the bell icon or follow. Bye for now.